Hello everyone,
Hi.
my name's Jane Creasy and I am one of the Education Development Trust's associates. I've had a great pleasure of working on the development of the Multi-Academy Trust peer review programme for Education Development Trust, MPP. And with me today, I've got two MAT chief execs I'm very pleased to say hello to. I wonder if you can say hello, both of you. Helen, let's start with you.
Good afternoon. I'm Helen Rowland, Chief Executive of Focus Trust, which is based in West Yorkshire, Greater Manchester and Cheshire. And we have 15 primary academies. We were established in 2012 and we took our 15 academies on between then and 2017. We haven't, no other schools have joined our trust in the last 4 years. So we've done lots of embedding and further developing. Very much values led. And our vision is great academies at the heart of our community. So we're trying to do a lot of work to improve the opportunities for our children and their communities.
And I know very well that you do. So thank you very much, Helen. Andy, let's say hello to you.
Hello everyone, I'm Andy Yarrow, the Chief Executive of a trust called Anthem. That's a relatively new name for an organisation that used to be called CFBT Schools Trust. We changed our name about 18 months ago. We have 16 schools, 5 secondaries and 11 primaries that are dispersed over quite a wide geographical area, from Lincolnshire in the north down to Wokingham, London, Reading, Oxfordshire, further south. And again, we're quite a well-established trust. The first school, in fact, was sponsored by CFBT in 2006, and the MAT was created about 10 years ago. And similar to Focus, we haven't grown in recent years, although we do have an ambition to grow in the future. And again, values, culture are hugely important to us. Integrity, collaboration and excellence are our 3 values, and they are now well embedded in many aspects of the trust life.
Thank you both. And I think this point about your values is going to come through when we talk about your work together on MPP, the MAT to MAT peer review, because you two were paired for a peer review pilot as we developed the MAT peer review programme. Helen, you've been very heavily involved with SPP before that. And tell us about your involvement with that and how you became interested in the MAT review programme.
Yeah, so we're now in our 5th year of doing peer review across our academies, just with our 15 schools. They're in triads of 3 schools, 5 groups, and I've seen the benefits of how it works, the professional honesty and the constructive, challenging conversations that they can have in that mutually respectful conversation. And I'd been part of a MAT peer review with Forum Strategy. As a bit of a pilot, but because we were very committed to the model of the schools partnership programme, when I heard that they were doing a pilot of the MAT peer review that had the framework for us to look at, I was very interested, and it worked really well. It was quite time consuming to go through the framework, but the time that you take to do that then teases out what your line of inquiry is going to be. So it's time well spent and helps us focus on something that was a priority area for us, which turned out to be our curriculum. No surprise there.
Now, Andy, your involvement with SPP is very different in your trust, and you personally, isn't it? So what made you interested in this?
Somehow I'd got through my whole professional career in education without ever experiencing peer review before. So I certainly was aware that some of my colleagues were enthusiastic about the approach, but for me it was a new thing. I went into it with an open mind, but was quite astounded by how impactful it was for me personally and for my team, and have become a firm believer in the power of peer review, and we have started to identify a number of areas where we're building that now into our work as a trust. As one of the approaches that we use.
Thanks, Andy. Helen referred to the framework and sort of took us into the process. And you've just said, Andy, that you were quite astounded at how powerful the process was. I wonder if you could both tell us about the parts of the process that you thought were most beneficial. Maybe if we started with you, Helen, you can tell us first of all what the process involved.
Yes, so there's a process of self-review. And so it's, first of all, it's identifying who your review team are going to be. So you don't just do the review yourself. It's very important that you have the views of all the review team. So in our case, that was myself, that was one of our Academy Improvement Partners, one of our trustees, who's the chair of our board, and then one of our head teachers. So you're getting a 360-degree review, view on things, which was very important. And then from that self-review, you iron out what you think your line of inquiry is. We then went along to a meeting, which seems a lifetime since now, in a very small room in London, and we discussed this in more detail. We introduced ourselves to Anthem, they introduced themselves to us, and then we got asked various questions about why we thought that should be our line of inquiry, and then the Anthem planned the review day for us based on your line of inquiry, didn't you? Likewise, we planned it when we came to you. So there's a lot. You've just got to put your trust in the other review team, that everything will be done in an atmosphere of confidentiality. And this is what we've discovered when doing peer review, that it's only by being mutually respectful and honest that you'll get the most out of any of this process. If we went along and said, oh, everything was wonderful, when we saw something that we knew might help them, and likewise they said to us, oh, everything's brilliant, and we knew there was something not quite right. It's best to be honest with each other, and then it's just about gathering as many views as you possibly can, either on the day or before the day, meeting as many different people, and then each time you've had those conversations, reflecting on what do you want to ask the next group of people from what you've heard. And then the ultimate thing, which I think I was quite apprehensive about, was actually then, well, we've heard some feedback that might be slightly uncomfortable to some people, but actually we need to share that in an honest and respectful way to be supportive to the other trusting going forwards. But we were always supported by the framework, by the resources, and it was incredibly beneficial for us all.
Andy, you said you were surprised at how beneficial it was. Which bits of it, don't tell us about the impact just yet. Just tell us about which bits of it.
Certainly, yeah. Well, as Helen has mentioned, the self-review process at the beginning, I think, we, our schools generally are experienced in self-review because they have to do that because of the Ofsted inspection process and our own processes that we have within multi-academy trusts. But actually for the trust itself to self-evaluate is harder because there isn't necessarily exactly the same sort of frameworks to work to. So the self-evaluation process built into this at the outset is in itself a very useful exercise for the leadership team of any MAT to actually undertake. The fact that it then leads on to this process of identifying the area of focus for the peer review is obviously an added benefit. And for us, we deliberately made ourselves quite vulnerable, I think, because we chose an area that was a priority, but we knew had historically been an area of weakness for the trust, and was an area that we really needed to address. And this was to do with really the ethos and culture of the trust as a whole, and obviously it's the schools that make up the trust. So we were aware that there would be some tough conversations. There would be some things that would be exposed that weren't necessarily all positive, though there were, I'm pleased to say, some positive things. And it was good to get affirmation and encouragement about the journey of improvement as well. It's easy, isn't it, within an organisation to develop blind spots where we think things are okay when they're not, or equally we think things are not very good when actually perhaps they're better than they are. So that external view is extremely helpful.
Yeah, thank you. Helen referred to being nervous about maybe giving some slightly tricky feedback. Were your colleagues at all apprehensive about the process?
Well, if anything, I think the apprehension for us was because the area of focus for Focus Trust was the curriculum. And I think that we were perhaps concerned that we ourselves may not, within our team, have all of the expertise needed to really critically assess the curriculum in place across the schools we're visiting and be able to add value. So, you know, although I've had a number of years experience of overseeing primary schools, I'm a secondary specialist. So going into a primary school classroom for me will always be, in relative terms, a challenge in terms of me adding value with profound insights about the curriculum. But actually, I think because it wasn't just based on our opinion, but it was based on the conversations that we had with children and with staff, as well as school leaders, we quickly built up quite a clear picture, actually, and I think we were able to identify some areas for further development, which came out not of us being inspectorial, but came out of the dialogue that we had.
Thank you. You've already referred to the framework, and I think both of you have said that the framework itself and the process of self-review is very useful. That gives you structure and makes you think. The facilitation part of the programme, it doesn't happen during the course of the peer review itself. But how was that useful for you?
The facilitator guided us through very skillfully on the particular areas we'd identified in the self-review. So it was helpful to be able to reflect on why we'd said that was a strength, why we thought that should be looked at. It was based on evidence from research, and that's always really important. In the school peer reviews, we look at evidence from research and, you know, take best practice. I think, how can we incorporate that? So that was very useful, and certainly looking at leadership teams and, you know, highly effective teams. We looked at evidence around that, and then how can we bring that into the review? So the facilitation is a very important part of it, because I think if you just went straight from self-review into the review, having missed out that facilitation, it would you would be nowhere near as clear on what your narrow specific line of inquiry was.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I think it's vital, really, that facilitation is there. That's the consistency that is required in order to bring about the clarity of focus in the exercise.
So if we turn to thinking about the outcomes and the impact of the peer review that your two trusts did for one another, what changes or improvements do you think, Andy, you have implemented in your MAT as a direct result of this review?
Because the focus for us was on our culture, the review came at a really important time for us, because we had just established, for example, what our values were, and it was one of the areas that the peer review probed into, was the extent to which colleagues across the schools were familiar with and had ownership and understanding of those values. Now, since then, over the past year, I think we've made considerable progress in embedding those values, and not just people knowing them, but now being really proud of those values and genuinely enthusiastic about modelling those values in their behaviour. So that's considerable progress that's been made. Undoubtedly, the peer review process helped us to gain greater clarity on the necessary steps that we needed to take in order to develop the culture of the organisation in that way. I think it also gave us a reference point. So whilst this is perhaps less of a solid impact in terms of things you would now be able to see if you came back a year later, we quite frequently refer to things that we learned through that peer review visit. You know, there will be occasions where we'll sort of almost say, well, how would Focus Trust do this? Because it was, for us, we felt that Focus were further ahead in a number of key areas, and provided that sense a good model for us to look at. Not that we would necessarily ever be identical, but nonetheless, how would that work? So, for example, the way that a very strong feature we felt was the way there was the collaborative ethos amongst the head teachers, and the amount of trust that Helen and her team placed in the head teachers, and the power to an extent that they were given to influence the direction of travel of the trust as a whole. That made an impression on us, and I think we felt that that was something we wanted to be able to get to that place where there was that level of trust and alignment between the head teachers, in particular in the trust, in order for us to be able to operate in that way. So that's one example. I think one other key thing for us was that we had the opportunity to involve a couple of colleagues who were not on the leadership team, on the executive team of the trust, but were people who are experienced head teachers who are keen to develop their experience of working beyond their own school. And again, it was timely for those individuals, but it really gave them an opportunity to blossom and flourish. And we were again delighted to see how much they enjoyed the experience, how much they got out of it, how much they grew through it. And there have been direct benefits as a result of that, because both of those colleagues have now gone on to take on more responsibility within the trust, critically supporting other schools where their experience is a benefit to those schools. So that has been a hugely beneficial outcome for us.
A very powerful outcome, and I was going to ask you separately about it anyway, but since we're on it, those couple of colleagues, you said they enjoyed it, they grew in the process. Can you think of how, was it just their confidence that grew, or did they develop more awareness?
It's greater objectivity, I think. Yes, yeah, and the ability to, broaden their horizons in a sense, and gave them a chance to transfer learning which they developed within their own schools, both impressive schools and high performing schools, but to be able to use that learning in order to look at another school and be able to sort of draw out from what they see, what the key areas are that could enable those schools to be more effective.
Yeah, lovely. Helen, what about focused trust?
For us, the impact, we were quite brave because it was quite early on in curriculum development. We'd done quite a lot the previous year, but we were very ambitious in our curriculum, and we wanted to sort of check that out and see where it was. So for us, the impact was around that, 15 schools, it's not, your curriculum development isn't going to be exactly as strong in all 15. So we asked the Anthem review team to look at the ones that were nearest to our school, that were in Oldham, so that it was less of a challenge with the travel, because we did encounter that when we came to Anthem Trust, didn't we? So they went first hand into 5 of our schools actually, and gathered a lot of first hand evidence, but then met face to face all the other head teachers, so everybody got a chance to talk about the curriculum, and they had some messages to give us, which they did in an honest and respectful way, about where the curriculum development was strong and the practice, but where it was less so, and that then gave us the opportunity to talk to the heads in those schools. So this is what the evidence that was given, what do you think? This is what we think the next step should be. So, really good framework. And it gives you a day or 2 days in this particular instance to really hone in on an area that otherwise you'd think, I'm too busy to do that, can't do it justice.
There are now a few networks for chief executives to engage with each other. Not many, but compared with, the old days of and head teacher partnerships and so on, but there are a few, but there aren't really those opportunities for the leadership teams of MATs to work together. So it is quite a lonely job sometimes, I think, being a regional director or an education director in a multi-academy trust, and certainly can be insular. So what's great about this is an opportunity not just for the CEOs. In fact, they're just equal partners within the team. Quite rightly, this is an opportunity for a team to work together and to meet another team from another trust. So it's all of the conversations that are going on at different levels between trustees, between the chief executives, but also between education directors and head teachers. So there's a huge number of different conversations going on, and people learn a lot from that, a lot from the informal conversations, and of course, you know, the bit more of the social time as well, which is an important part of something like that, which is great for those conversations. And I think it helps people even reflect on their own career development as well.
Excellent. Thank you very much, both of you. I think it's what you're saying about the impact, it comes across so strongly. It's very good. What about for yourselves though? Do you feel that the process contributed to your own development and learning personally as CEOs?
I would say so, and I think I mean I had been sort of CEO for about 2.5 years at the time of the review, so I suppose at that point where I was established but still had a lot to do, as we always have a lot to do, but there was still, you know, a whole host of things on my mind that I needed to tackle. And I think it was helpful from that point of view in helping me perhaps prioritize and identify the order in which those challenges ought to be addressed. That was helpful. And I just think it's also useful to see another chief executive in action, rather than hearing them speak at an event where they could be saying anything. You actually see them in action, you know, in their head office, in some of their schools, with their team. You learn a lot from them as a role model. And, you know, Helen and I have differences in our approach and our personality and our leadership style. We have similarities unquestionably in terms of our values and beliefs and motivations. So, but I think, you know, there are things that, you know, I've taken a few leaves out of Helen's book, certainly. I wouldn't necessarily do things exactly the same, but the fact that she approached some things in a particular way made me question, you know, actually, should I be a bit more like that? Should I do things that way? Maybe yes, maybe no. But I had unquestionably had those questions. You know, one of those obvious things, I guess, is the extent to which chief executives directly manage particular areas or distribute leadership of particular areas. And there was a difference there. And I think that was very interesting for me to explore that with Helen, and the reasons why there are certain things that she personally controls that maybe I had delegated to others, or vice versa. You know, so I think that was really interesting for us. You know, and so we're not going to become clones of each other, but hopefully a bit of the good stuff of each of us has rubbed off on the other one.
Excellent. Helen, what about you? What about your learning and development?
When you came, it made me realise that whilst we're ambitious for our curriculum as a group of trustees, a leadership team, our head teachers were, we hadn't clearly communicated it to all our staff. So, you know, just sending it out on a newsletter doesn't always have the impact that you want, does it? So, you know, we were quite brave. We asked Anthem to do a survey of all our 930 colleagues in schools. So inevitably, you're going to get learning support assistants, site staff. Had I really clearly communicated our ambition for our curriculum to them? So it made us keep reflecting on that. And, you know, since we met you, and did the review, with obviously our digital strategy has just developed tenfold, and we've now got teams set up, so you know, at the touch of a button I can communicate with all colleagues, trustees, governors and staff across the trust. So it enabled us to reflect on how effective our communication about certain things was, but was very affirming in that our collective efficacy came through our values, and where things did need improving, we knew what we needed to do. So yeah.
Well, it sounds as though it was quite impactful for you both personally. It also sounds as though you developed quite a positive relationship with one another too. You see that as a professional relationship that can go on?
Yes, definitely. Yeah, we've
definitely
kept it. Well, Helen's very good at keeping in touch. I think it's one of her particular skills, and you know, sometimes just sends a message just to say, you know, through the COVID period of time, you know, hope everything's going okay, you know, thought of you, and you know, hope you're surviving, sort of thing, which is lovely, because again, I say it's quite a lonely world sometimes in you know, the multi-academy trust top level. You know, it's quite, you know, it's quite a competitive marketplace, isn't it? And sometimes you don't necessarily have a large network of people you can be completely honest with. And I think because of the experience we've been through and the feedback we've given each other, I would have absolutely no concerns about sharing anything with Helen, even if it, you know, I could use her as a, you know, in a peer coaching way if I had, you know, a really tricky situation to deal with and wanted another CEO's perspective. And now we've established that trust, you know, I know that she would give me wise, professional, thoughtful advice about that, you know. So and she would also know, she'd be able to empathize somewhat with what I was referring to, because she's seen enough of us in action to be able to understand.
You both have mentioned trustees during the course of this conversation. You've both mentioned trustees as being involved. How have your trust boards received this peer review, the MAP peer review?
Yeah, if I could just say that the trustee, we initially did have our chair of the board as part of the facilitation session of the self-review, but he couldn't make the review days. So we brought another trustee who was actually the head of a secondary school, who does peer review in his schools before he retired. And this was a very different model of peer review, and it showed him a different way to doing it using that framework, because that model is more of an Ofsted, a Moxted type one that he uses. This is obviously very different. And he said he gained such an insight into our trust itself, but then also another trust was highly valuable to him, because it makes you reflect on what's important to you in your trust. And so he was able to come back to our trustees and say it was really powerful to be part of this experience for him professionally, personally, and as a trustee.
Where a multi-academy trust is wanting to develop a stronger sense of partnership between the executive and the trustees, I think this could be a very effective way of doing that. And so it's certainly something we would consider for future. The trustees, of course, received and read and discussed the report that Helen and her team wrote for us, and I think again that was extremely helpful for them to get an external perspective on something that we talked about within the organisation a lot, but that was useful for them.
And how do you see then the place of MAP-to-MAP peer review for your own trusts going forward, and indeed for the Academy Trust system as a whole?
We would certainly be keen to engage in peer review again, whether that's with Focus or whether that's with another organisation. There would be clearly mileage in both of those things, and it's something we would certainly strongly encourage others to do if they haven't tried it before.
Yes, thank you. I was going to ask you if you'd recommend it, and it sounds like you would.
Yes,
you just did, Andy. Helen?
I would definitely recommend this process to other MAT leaders. The process of self-review with people beyond myself and my exact, leadership team was really valuable. So to bring in another head teacher, to bring a trustee into that was valuable, and an academy improvement partner. I think the time could be effectively used in the facilitation period by doing it remotely. So we'll be able to meet a facilitator and another peer review team via remote technologies. And that would save a lot of travel time. And then you could spend the time that was really valuable by meeting each other face to face. Obviously, in the current climate, that may not be possible for a while. And I know from doing virtual peer reviews in our own schools, you can get an awful lot of information gained. You can get lots of information by meeting each other remotely. So I think we could still do MAP peer review remotely before we can safely engage with each other face to face again.
Yes, thank you very much. And I want to say thank you both very much indeed for such open and animated discussion of your experience of the MAP peer review. Thank you.
You're very welcome.
Thank you. Lovely to talk to you.